futures. And sometimes we may say at first, wow, that's cool. But when we think more carefully, we may realize a future will have many drawbacks. Or sometimes when we hear about a future, we may say, yuck, I don't like it. But when we think more carefully, we might realize it could be a good future after all. The third question is even more important. It's the question of what now? Futurists are not just looking to the future. Futurists are asking, what should we change in the present time, in 2022, to prepare for these possible futures, and even perhaps to change the possibilities ahead? So that's what I'm going to cover. And I will start by looking back. I've been thinking about the future for a long time. This is the kinds of devices that I was working on nearly 30 years ago. A simple handheld mobile computer. I was a software engineer, a software manager, and in my company, Scion, we were thinking hard about the future. We were working on these devices, fixing bugs, but we were also thinking, how could we improve them to prepare for future possibilities? So at the same time as we changed the existing product, we designed a wonderful new product for a few years later with a better screen, with touch capabilities, with larger applications, with a different operating system. So that was looking to the future that could easily be foreseen. But the hardest part of predicting the future is a different kind of future. So let me explain. I believe all people, to be successful, should split their focus across 3 horizons in parallel. And all good organizations, all good businesses need to think in parallel about 3 horizons. The first horizon is the present. It's keeping your commitments. It's not dropping any balls. As you can see in this picture, these employees, these team members are looking upwards, making sure the balls all keep going up and down. But we have to look forward sometimes, and good companies will look forwards for more of the same. Look forward to new customers for existing products, look forward to ways to reduce the cost of products, or to, as we did in Scion, add in new features. Most companies are good at these 2 horizons. Where companies often fail is in the game-changed future. That's seeing something you didn't expect to see. If you're not careful, if you're not looking for the elephant, you may not see the elephant until it's too late and it charges at you and destroys your business or kills you. This is not the elephant in the room, but the elephant on the footpath. However, if you see the elephant in good time, you can learn how to ride it, and you can use it to take you to a much better future. And that's what we did in my company in Scion in the 1990s. We had our present activities, we built our own future device, but we realized an elephant was coming our way. Let me explain. And this, by the way, is a picture that my colleagues and I drew in 1998. 24 years ago, we anticipated one trend, which was the trend we were already watching, computers becoming smaller and more mobile. You can see that on the left of this picture. But we realized an elephant was coming to us. This was the elephant of the mobile phone industry. Early on, mobile phones were very simple, but increasingly they would become more complicated with more features, with applications. This would change our whole future. So we saw that, and eventually we decided we would change our own software, that it wouldn't just be for handheld computers, it would be for these devices you can see here, communicators and smartphones. So we changed our operating system, which we called Epoch and later Symbian OS, and we patiently built an environment for people from the largest phone manufacturers to cooperate with us. And in June 1998, we had investment from the 3 largest phone manufacturers from that time. You may know their names, perhaps, Nokia and Ericsson and Motorola. And later we had investment from many other companies too. It took a long time for this vision to be successful. And this is a pattern that I'll be talking about as I look forward into the future. Here's the pattern. This curve is not showing smartphones. This curve is showing existing phones, feature phones, phones without applications, the simple devices that were just used for making voice calls and text messages. And we imagined that we would disrupt that world with our smartphones, with applications built on. So that was our vision. And this pattern is more general. The bottom line is an existing way of doing something. For example, a way of buying music. We used to go to real shops and spend real money and bring home a cassette tape or a piece of plastic with music on it. And the pink line is an example of a new platform. For example, buying music online, downloading it and listening to it on our own devices. So we expected this transition would come quite soon. In 1998, we had a business plan that it would take 3 years to become profitable. We had a lot of hype and excitement about our platform, but as often happens, initially, there was not much interest in our product. Our earlier smartphones were difficult for people to use. They were expensive. They were hard to configure. But we were still excited. We said soon smartphones will come and soon smartphones will change the world. But it still took longer. We had a great technology, but there weren't yet great applications for our phones. So we had 3 new rounds of funding before eventually we broke through. And eventually by about 2006, we were very profitable. And by that stage, about 100 million smartphones were sold with our software. And then the next few years, we eventually sold 500 million, that's 500 million phones. And at that stage, most consumers were less interested in the old kinds of phones. And that's a general pattern. And at that stage, the new platform needed different processes, different skills, different tools to be successful. So I'll summarize that. Yes, question.
I'm sorry interrupting you, but I want to ask a very important question.
Go ahead.
You are the member of software developed in mobile phone and mobile devices.
Yes.
About 30 years ago, since 1990. And like when you explained to us, now the point, the new process comes out. But as you are expert of this field, did you expect that kind of a elephant suddenly comes out? the poor usability, we know. So Nokia, Motorola, they ignore the trend when the Steve Jobs expect to, produce smartphone 2009, 2007, and they ignored. But what do you think with that time? Please remember the times when your thought.
Well, I'm coming to that. That's a very important question. This is still in the future from this chart. This chart is showing the first wave of smartphones, the smartphones using software from my company, Symbian, software from other companies that I'll show in a minute. But then there was another elephant, not the elephant of the mobile phone industry, but as we'll see, the elephant from Silicon Valley, from Apple, from Steve Jobs, and also from Google with their Android phones. So I will answer that question in a moment as to why so many companies failed to handle that transition. But you're right, many great companies don't succeed with disruptive transitions, and it will be the same in the future too. So to anticipate what's the biggest changes ahead, there will be more disruptions like this, and more of the old ways of doing things will be left behind. And many companies who were previously successful will fail. Many individuals who previously had good jobs will find themselves almost unemployable. That's the pattern which I'm explaining. So here, this transition took place in the middle of the first decade of this century, about 2005, 2006. That's when the first smartphones became successful. But the general pattern is it's often difficult for people to know, is a new disruption really coming? Because often there is hype, but then a new trend fails. Instead of shooting up to the sky, it is a damp squib, which means a firework that doesn't explode. It just falls to the ground and everybody's disappointed. And many potential disruptions are like that. And what I'll talk about later on is how to distinguish these cases, the disappointments from the ones with breakthroughs. But what companies should have done in seeing this kind of possible transition, they should prepare at least for some chance this new world is coming. We need each of us to realize some possible changes and research them an extent and build some partnerships to help us succeed if these changes do happen. And in some cases, companies can do more than just wait. They can take charge of the change. They can add the applications. They can improve the design. So to jump ahead, this is what happened with our phase one smartphones. We were supporting the soft phones of Nokia and Motorola. 15 years ago, the other really successful mobile phones were from companies such as BlackBerry with a wonderful messaging device, or Palm, very popular in America. And in all cases, these companies took a while to overcome the earlier, simpler feature phones. But then, as you pointed out, there was another transition, the transition from Silicon Valley. And that took a long time as well. Now we think the iPhone was successful straight away, very quickly. But actually, Steve Jobs had many failed phone projects before the iPhone was successful. If you look at what happened, Steve Jobs with Apple had a joint project with Motorola, producing a smartphone which was a total market failure. So nobody talks about it now. It took a long time for them to be successful. And Android, you can see the image of the Android here from Google. It took them 7 years from their first product idea in 2003 before they became successful selling 10 million units with their software in 2010. So I summarize all this by saying the future arrives in waves, but the waves often take a long time to start before becoming destructive. Another thing I'll say about these waves is that each case software became more important. The first, simplest phones had few applications. You could send text messages, and some of them had a few simple games. But the middle set of smartphones had significant software because there was a lot of hardware power there. And by the time of this second phase, these iPhones and Android had enormous amounts of hardware, and so software was especially critical. Hence the phrase, which the students may have heard, software is eating the world. It means whichever industry you are in, if you don't have good knowledge and expertise in software, you will likely be defeated by your competitors in your industry who know more about software. But by 2010, it was already clear to me that something even bigger was coming. This was artificial intelligence. And I started thinking that in due course, it would not just be software written by humans that would be important, but software written by AI that would change the world. And that's the future that I now want to start talking about. Again, It will take a long time before it becomes really significant, but when it happens, it will have even larger changes, much larger changes than the smartphones changes. That's why from around 2008, I was organizing meetings in London to discuss these possibilities more seriously. We have had, as you said at the beginning, more than 250 public events discussing these possibilities. And over these 14 years, we have produced a lot of videos, summaries of our meetings. I have produced a lot of books too, which I'll show later on, but I have gained a lot of insight as to the possibilities ahead, which I am now sharing with the students.
Okay, David, I have another question. Like a previous slide, the phase 1, phase 2, now phase 3. So phase 2, those companies, Nokia, RIM, Motorola, Palm, they are all gone. They're gone.
Yes.
Disappear from our world. And now in the middle of the Apple and Android. So like you and I, we experienced that transition from the traditional company to the new company. But can you imagine another offset, another defeat those Apples and Googles? Now is those two companies too large elephant? So it's hard to imagine that can be defeated from another competitors. In my views, now it's just like a giant is unchangeable great one. But what do you think about that? Can you predict?
Well, I will say something more about that later on, but I can say now, sometimes a company can manage a transition. So actually in phase 0, the most successful company was also Nokia. So Nokia was successful in managing that first transition very well. Nokia planned for a new future. So I think there will be big disruptions ahead with the devices we use. Artificial intelligence will become even more important than today. And it may be that some companies are better at managing the new artificial intelligence than others. Apple has a challenge here. Apple likes secrecy. Apple does not like its researchers to publish their findings.
Okay.
And most good AI researchers don't like to work in that kind of situation. So there is a risk that companies like Google, who allow their researchers to publish more freely, may suddenly find they are in a stronger position than Apple. So Apple has to see that possibility and has to ensure they don't lose having the best AI researchers. But there's another possibility for the next phase. It may be, and we'll talk about this, that the most important thing isn't so much about AI, it's more about a feeling of security and privacy and trusting the company very well. And there is a growing backlash against big tech. Many people are increasingly upset about big technology. The worry is that technology is manipulating us for their own profits. And people have mixed views about Google and YouTube as a result. But people tend to trust Apple more because Apple isn't making money by selling our data. Apple makes money instead from the hardware and from the applications. So if that trend becomes more important, perhaps Apple will consolidate its position.
I see.
There are other scenarios too, in which, for example, the Chinese companies like Huawei and Xiaomi and others could leap forwards with better AI in them as well. They have done remarkable things in AI in China, and I'll talk about that later as well. And we'll see that's another possibility for the future.
Well, thank you.
So let's look at the bigger picture now. The smartphones was interesting. It has been tremendously important for the financial success of companies, but I'm now going to talk about even larger changes. And again, I'm going to start by looking backward. So instead of London future, allow me to spend a little time on London past. Why? Please be patient. I'm going to look at some very old statistics from the United Kingdom. We have in England data going back to 1270. So that's more than 700 years of statistics for GDP. That's how much economic activity there has been for the average person. So do you think the average amount of economic activity has gone up and down? Do you think it's been flat? What kind of curve do you think will be shown here? Let me view it. Here we go. So there are a few points we can see. There has been a dip for a short while because of the First World War, and a dip for a short while with the Second World War, and more recently a dip with the 2008 world financial crisis. But the bigger pattern is slow change for hundreds of years, followed by increasing acceleration from the middle of the 1800s. That's the statistics for wealth. What about the statistics for health? Well, the UK has very long statistics for that as well. People have calculated from old records how long people could expect to live when born at different times. What do you think this curve looks like? Was it up and down as well? Is it flat? Let's look at the data. So there are a few interesting points. Some dip here in 1918. And I think many people know there was a worldwide terrible flu epidemic that year, which caused this reduction in average life. And further back in history, there were other terrible diseases, typhus, and lots of farms didn't have any workers in them, so the crops failed. And further back in history, another terrible epidemic of flu. But the bigger picture, when we don't look just at small changes, the bigger picture is for most of history, the average lifespan was about 40 years and didn't change much. That's how long the average person could expect to live. Then from 1860 onwards, it surged upwards. And more recently, it's still increased, but more slowly. Other countries have similar statistics. They don't go so far back. But in almost every case, the life expectancy didn't change until relatively recently, and then it's gone up and up and up. The number of average years of education. This isn't quite so long, these statistics, but the same pattern is there, surging upwards in recent years. Now, I could show many more statistics, but I'm going to summarize in the words of this professor from MIT, Andrew McAfee. He said that if you look at lots of statistics for population, for economic expansion, for social development, they all show the same pattern. For thousands of years, there was not much change. Some years up, some years down, but on average, they were the same until around the middle of that 18th century, there was a surge upwards because of improvements in industry, from the improvements in the steam engine that the engineer James Watt created. To summarize, history teaches that nothing changes the world like technology. So when we study history at school, we often learn about empires and great wars and despots and democrats. But nothing actually changed these big statistics so much as a few practical inventions. So I'm going to show a history of the whole world in one chart, which is ridiculous to try and put everything in all of history on one chart. So this is very simplified, but I think it's true to a first approximation. The history of the world is a history of increasing technological change. 1760 was the start of the first industrial revolution, with improvements to the steam engine, enabling automation in factories, and later enabling a new kind of transport, trains, changing first of all a few countries in Europe and later changing the whole world. Now, historians talk about waves of industrial revolution, just like I talked earlier about waves of smartphones, waves of technological change. So there was a second industrial revolution from around the 1880s with electricity displacing steam as the main power in factories, with the ability to create new chemicals, new fertilizers, new drugs, with Henry Ford enabling mass production at lower costs of cars and so forth. So I've drawn that bigger because it changed the world even more. The first industrial revolution was mainly led from Europe. The second industrial revolution involved innovations from America as well. The third industrial revolution involved computers, electronics, cellular communications. It had innovation from Asia as well as America and Europe. And it starts from around 1960. That's when the first integrated circuit with silicon was created, actually 1959. That's when computers started to impact how people did work. That's even bigger change. And the fourth industrial revolution, I'm going to talk more about, because that's the one that's going to change our lives even more than the previous industrial revolutions. And it's based around what various futurists call NBIC convergence. Now, a few points about these different industrial revolutions. They have a lot in common. First of all, they take advantage of science. And until we had a good understanding of science, we couldn't create this new technology. They also depend on openness in society. That means you're able to criticize the existing philosophies and even the existing rulers. You're able to try different things. It also means you're able to form companies. So the steam engine was not just built by James Watt, the engineer. He had business innovation with his business partner, Matthew Boulting, and they had innovations with patents that enabled them to create all these steam engine enhancements. So that's important to propel technology forwards. Secondly, each of the industrial revolutions had what historians call overhang. That means there was more achieved from a simple invention than anyone had expected. The steam engine initially was just to do one task. It was to clean water out of mines. But when it was improved, then people realized it could be used for many other tasks. So industry after industry was transformed by applying the steam engine. It was the same with computers. At first, people thought computers were useful for just a few tasks, calculating missile trajectories, predicting the weather, breaking encryption. But then people realized computers could be used for more and more different tasks. Then there's another key feature about these industrial revolutions. They all involve positive feedback cycles. And let me explain. One positive feedback cycle is that between technology and tools. Initially, these pieces of technology were built with fairly simple tools. But when you have better technology, you're able to build better tools, which allows you to build better technology. So computers were initially slow and difficult to build. If you see the film of Alan Turing building the first computers in the Second World War, The Imitation Game is the name of that film, they build these computers with hammers and nails, and they design them on paper. But each computer can now be used to help manufacture and design better computers. It's not just the technology improves, the technology makes us people smarter and gives us strength. So we are able to do more. And technology also improves society. It allows better education. It has things like Wikipedia and online courses and Zoom, whereby we can connect. So technology makes society more capable. And all of these positive feedback cycles generate acceleration. And if you look at the dates, you'll see an acceleration in how quickly each new wave comes compared to the previous one. Between the first two waves, there's a delay of about 120 years. But the next wave comes after only around 80 years, about 2/3 of the previous delay. And then the fourth industrial revolution is coming even more quickly, about 2/3 of the time. And if we think about, could this pattern continue into the future? If that was the case, then in about another 35 years, which is about 2045, there might be a fifth industrial revolution. And futurists already talk about this. It's the industrial revolution, sometimes called the singularity or the technological singularity, when we don't just have AI, we have artificial general intelligence, AGI, or artificial super intelligence, which is more capable than humans in every aspect and which can do all human jobs better than humans can do. And we could talk about that, but I'm going to cut this off because I'm going to concentrate on what happens before then, because actually, unless we manage the fourth industrial revolution well, we're never even going to get to the fifth industrial revolution, because the changes that are being unleashed are so large and so disruptive. The other thing about,
David, the singularity is a new term to our student. So can you explain more about this, what the singularity concept is?
The singularity is the idea, which many people have foreseen, that eventually computers will be capable in every field of human thought. Today, computers are better than humans in many narrow fields. So we have narrow intelligence, artificial narrow intelligence. But increasingly, a computer that is trained to do one task is also good at other tasks. And eventually, everything that we humans think we can do well will be done at least as well by computers. And when that happens, here's one thing the computers will do better than us. They will design a new computer better than us. And in a short space of time, the computer, which was already cleverer than us, will have a new computer that is even cleverer than us. It will have read all the academic articles. It will have studied its own source code. It will have modified itself. And that new ultra intelligent computer, what will it be able to do? Well, it will be better able to design an even more ultra super intelligent computer. So in a short space of time, perhaps months, perhaps weeks, perhaps days, instead of having a piece of AI that's a bit cleverer than all humans, there will be a piece of AI that is hundreds or maybe thousands of times cleverer than all humans. And that is the singularity. And that is a frightening, but also exciting concept. And a lot of what I write about is how we can anticipate a successful, positive singularity in which the new AI will want to help us humans in the way that we humans often love to help our grandparents. We are more capable and stronger than our grandparents because we are younger and fitter and better educated, and we like to ensure they have a good life. Hopefully, the AI will want to help us. But if it is designed badly, if it evolves in a different direction, it may not care about us. And that would be a negative singularity.
There's a scary point, actually. We've seen the movies many times. The AI kills humans.
Well,
due to the malfunctioning of software engineering of code. And even they think they're better than humans someday later.
Well, sometimes AI is already killing humans. There is some self-driving cars which had accidents because the AI couldn't recognize what it was seeing. Something happened that was not within its programming. It made the wrong decision. And sadly, a small number of people had died as a result.
Right.
There have been weapon systems where the AI has gone wrong, a mistake. And some cases, the weapon system shot random bullets into groups of soldiers, and some soldiers were killed. So we already have some real life situations where AI malfunctioned, it was badly designed. And if we're not careful, we can have more of that in the future, well within the lifetimes, the expected lifetimes of most of the students here. But what I want to talk about is that we may not even get there, because even with today's AI, even with the AI that will come in the next few years, there will be many equally scary and frightening possibilities, but also there will be some potentially wonderful possibilities. So we have to look at the opportunities that these industrial revolutions give us, which include the opportunities for better health. Each of the AIs that we are creating can help improve medicine, for example, can help discover new drugs, can help to study medical data, and can find out quickly things that may be wrong with us that need attention. AI can also help better education, better housing, create more useful consumer goods more cheaply, and overall can improve our well-being. That's happened with all the industrial revolutions to an extent, which is why in the last 100, in 50 years or so, people have lived longer and had more education and had more economic activity. But each of the industrial revolutions brings not just opportunities, but also risks to damage the environment. And that's what happened already with the consequences of some of our technology. The way we are using energy, dirty energy, is doing terrible damage to the environment. But it's not just damage to the environment. Each new set of technology allows new kinds of crime. When there was trains, there was the invention of railway robberies. Now that we have computers and electronic communications, there is cyber crime and cyber hacking and ransomware. It's not just new possibilities for crime, there are new possibilities for warfare. There are new possibilities for people to be confused and upset, and more social chaos. And in what's happening in some parts of the world is there is no longer a respect for science. If you look at the bottom here, there is less respect for science. There is less respect in some parts of the world for openness. And some politicians are saying they should never lose power. They are declaring themselves as presidents for life, or they don't want to accept the results of elections. And in part, that's because of the chaos of social media, in which all kinds of conspiracies and fantasies are spreading and leading people to be divided. So that's the scenario ahead, which we need to anticipate. But I'd like to explain more about NBIC, what that actually stands for, because I want to speak a bit more concretely now. So what do these 4 letters stand for? It was already announced in the introduction, but I'll say it again. The I is for infotech. It's not just for software. We've had software since the 3rd industrial revolution, but what's new now is machine learning of big data. It's software that's able to study large amounts of information and come up with new algorithms all by itself. N is for nanotech. And I know Korea is one of the world leaders in nanotechnology. There is the ability to control more precisely the arrangements of atoms. In due course, there will be nano-sized computers, nanobots, which will allow transformation in manufacturing. And they will also allow new things in our health with very small surgery, not microsurgery, but nanosurgery. B stands for biotech. It's to reprogram not our computers, but to reprogram our biology. And since 2010, there have been many innovations in genetic reprogramming, such as CRISPR. So we can already envision lots of changes in our biology. And C is for cognotech. It's to reprogram not just our biology, but our psychology. It's a better understanding than ever before of what's happening in our brains. So these 4 quadrants, these 4 corners, are 4 parts of this industrial revolution. The top half, we can say, is about hardware. The bottom half, we can say, is about software. The left half is about physics. The right half is about biology, simply speaking. But the most important thing to understand is that changes and improvements in any one of these quadrants can produce improvements in the other quadrants as well. An example, better nanotech means we are able to sense what is happening. We have more ability to collect data. So we can collect data, what's happening inside people's brains, without needing to cut people's heads open, which nobody likes. We can instead have sensors on the skull, which can report reliably what's happening deep inside the brain when somebody is being intuitive or creative or meditating. And as we understand the brain better, we can copy these features into our artificial intelligence. And it's no surprise that many of the large AI companies have lots of PhDs, lots of doctorates from people who studied neuroscience. And with better AI, as I mentioned, we can have better healthcare. So each of the four quadrants can influence and accelerate the other ones. One more example. Better nanotech allows better chip design, not just better sensors, but better design of CPUs. That's the chip at the center of computers. More recently, improvements in GPUs. That's a different kind of chip that is very good for graphics displays. So it became popular when more people played graphics games on their PCs. But it turns out this kind of chip is very good for deep learning. And then there's more kinds of chips, TPUs, which Google have created, and other companies have got their own versions of new chips. And the point is these chips allow better AI. They are more suited to the kinds of calculations that AI needs. But this is the really interesting thing. With better AI, you can design better chips. And here's a recent newspaper headline. Google is using AI to design chips that will accelerate AI. So there's another positive feedback cycle there. So that's part of the reason why I am anticipating that after a slow start to the fourth industrial revolution, some disappointments with actual progress in biotech, disappointments with progress in nanotech, disappointments even with AI, I'm now expecting a fast and furious acceleration. Why? Why? Because simple word is money. In the past, AI didn't make a lot of difference to companies' financial performance, but in the last 10 years, companies who have been excellent at AI have become hugely financially successful. This is no longer just a science project of interest to philosophers. This is of interest to everybody who wants to make more money. And every single industry is poised to be more successful if they can find ways to improve AI and use it in their industry. So people who buy and sell shares. There are already AI systems that do automatic trading, and there are many people who want to get better AI to trade more intelligently and make even more money. Then there's another large industry, the gaming industry, which has succeeded not just because of the good graphics I mentioned, but more games have AI characters inside them. And the more intelligent these AI characters, it could mean more financial success for the gaming companies. We could talk about the use of AI to improve customer support with chatbots. Today, the chatbots aren't very good. They're often frustrating, they're disappointing, but when they have a better understanding of general language, they will allow companies to provide much better support to their customers without needing to spend money on lots of human support engineers. And there's improvements to interaction design, improvements to healthcare. Designing a new drug currently is a very long, time-consuming, expensive business, but there's lots of companies showing how AI can accelerate that process. There's improvements in creativity. Just in the last few months, there have been lots of new pieces of software allowing people to experiment with new graphics artistry. The same software can improve videos and music. Similar AI can improve engineering design and can even come up with new scientific theories. And the scientific theories can in turn be commercially significant. And then there's bad people too, who want to take advantage of AI. The people who write malware. The people who write malware are in a constant battle with the security industry, the people who write anti-malware software. they're always trying to find cleverer ways that the software can disguise its intent so that it can sneak inside systems and then hack them, stealing resources or stealing money. So there's an arms race there between people trying to use AI for more devious malware and other people trying to use AI to write better security software. An arms race. And there's another arms race involving real weaponry between the software that makes missiles track down incoming missiles and knock them out of the sky, and other software that's trying to evade these defensive mechanisms. And we are seeing this playing out now in the terrible battles in Ukraine, amongst other places. So there is, again, I say, a positive feedback cycle. And when I say positive, I mean the software is becoming more powerful, not necessarily that it's doing more good for humans. So that's why I'm expecting even faster progress, because of the commercial competition and the possibilities for companies to make more money. But it's not just a commercial competition, it's a geopolitical competition. The future of the planet is at stake, as Vladimir Putin has recognized a few years ago. He considers himself a philosopher too, and he is smart, very well informed. He said a few years ago that artificial intelligence is the future for all mankind, with colossal opportunities and threats, which are difficult to predict. But then he said, whoever becomes the leader in this sphere, artificial intelligence, will become the ruler of the world. And despite Vladimir Putin's intelligence, I don't want him to be the ruler of the world, and many other people don't want him to be the ruler of the world. So it's clear to many countries. Yeah.
The previous slide, you're showing us the benefit of AI. Okay, there is a variety of part and field. Now AI improving actually and efficiently, effectively, and operational performance. In this, which is very true fact to us in Korea, and in this field, in this room, here are master degree students and doctoral degree students, including me. We are, the Korea, we are always trouble to learn English and speaking English and writing English. English is a headache to me. After AI, Google Translate and Naver Papago in Korea, it hugely assist us think and write and speak, especially write the English written language. So that AI actually give us freedom, overcome the language barrier, which means we can be able to create and creatively what I thinking and what I thought and my idea, and I can be able to spread out through the world using our AI translator. So which means that in Korean people, we are diligent, we are very proactive, but we are frustrating because of the language barrier all the time. But now the AI give us freedom. Sooner or later, our creativity will govern all of the world. For example, Netflix effect, for example, the films, such like that. What do you think?
Yes, it's a great example. And translation has been done by AI for a long time, but wasn't very good until just a few years ago, when it suddenly got a lot better because of people using a different kind of AI. That's the deep learning with certain kinds of neural networks. At first, they were called recurrent neural networks. And then there was another innovation called long short-term memory. And now there's another innovation called transformers. And without going into the technical details, there is innovation upon innovation upon innovation, because you're quite right. They make our lives much better in so many ways. And it allows companies, therefore, to be commercially more successful too, instead of wasting a lot of time on slow, difficult translations by humans. Good example. So there's a competition.
However, the AI translation is a processing of just task working. But England, and they set up the rules and systems and structures, and then they owing the governance and ownership. For example, like Elsevier publication, global publishers, Emerald, and such kind of that they govern the rules and the systems. So even though we are using the AI very well, but things should belong to the system and platform set up by England long time ago.
I think that's going to change too. There are more alternative ways to publish now. There are people who will publish on various preprint mechanisms, which you know about more than me, because you are practicing academics and I don't know exactly, but more information can be shared by these other means. And I think the traditional publication industry will be disrupted pretty soon. Already more people are working to share this research without having to use the constraints of these old systems.
Thank you.
So I'm just explaining not just there are good things happening, but there is a lot of motivation for people to improve it. There's the geopolitical motivation. There's a Sputnik effect here. The Sputnik effect originally happened in the late 1950s when Russia, actually it was the Soviet Union at that time, launched the missile into space and shocked everybody in America who previously thought that American science and technology was the best in the world. So that caused the Americans to suddenly accelerate their own space program and their own science education. That led to the formation of NASA. It led to the formation eventually of the internet. Well, the improvements in AI are affecting different political leaders in the same way. They've had an especial effect in China. This is a picture from Xi Jinping a few years ago, his New Year's Day announcement. And they had already, China announced before, that they were determined to become the world's leading AI power. They did not want the world to be dominated by software from Western companies. They had been shocked by something that happened in 2016 and 2017, which was that the software from Western company, Google, had beaten the world's best players of Go. What's the Korean for Go? Baduk?
Go.
And so, Baduk, yes. So Lee Sedol, first of all, was defeated, surprisingly, in 2016. The Chinese were surprised, but they thought they had a better Go player, a very young player, but he was comprehensively beaten by the same software in 2017. So China said, this is a Sputnik moment. They had to accelerate their own research. And if you study these bookshelves, I'm told that you will find books by Mao and Marx and Lenin. You will find some great traditional writers like Charles Dickens and Hemingway, but you will also find books on computer science. Here's one by a professor from the University of Washington, The Master Algorithm. And there's a book by a colleague of mine in the futurist industry, Augmented. He's based in New York. I'm not sure whether Xi Jinping has actually read these books, but I'm sure that many people who are close to him have studied them carefully. And that's why they are spending more and more and more money on AI. So there are reasons why history is going to change. History so far has broadly been increasing human flourishing. People have lived longer in the last few hundred years. They've had more wealth, but at the same time, there has been increasing potential for damage from the technology we have created. And if we look ahead 15 years as to what might happen, and if we consider the key scenarios, most people think the future will probably continue the past. This is called business as usual. Most people think, well, it might go a bit faster, people might live a bit longer, or some people think it might slow down a bit. But I'm here to say these business as usual scenarios are pretty unlikely. I think they're only about a 10% likelihood. What's more likely is something like this: a social collapse, social chaos. Because if we don't manage the tremendous capabilities of the fourth industrial revolution, then we will have lots of bad things happening in society. I think this is about 30% likely. Now, if you add up the numbers, you will realize there's still 60% left. And there's a good possibility that something like this will happen. It's not just that we will live a bit longer, we will live much longer and much healthier over the course of the next few decades. I call this future sustainable abundance for all, or sustainable super abundance for all. And as I said, I think that's the most likely outcome, because we humans are creative and thoughtful and kind most of the time, but there's still too much a chance, 30% of really bad outcomes. So to go back to the question, yeah.
Why 15 years, your prediction? Why not 5 years?
It will take time because of the slow processes involved. I think AI will accelerate, so that will go faster, but designing new drugs will still take time. You can't shorten the tests completely. You can shorten them a bit. It is possible we could have major disruption by 2030, so it could happen sooner. It could take a bit longer, but I think unless some unusual things happen, the world will be very different, either worse in many aspects or better in many aspects in around 15 to 20 years' time.
Okay, thank you.
And we have to go back to the third question I asked at the very beginning, which, if you remember, is how do we influence the outcome? What should we be doing now to lower the probability of that very bad outcome and to increase the probability of that good outcome? And I think the most important thing is we have to be more realistic and clear about this vision of a wonderful, positive future. So we have to spend time clarifying what this could be like, not just what's in Hollywood or in K-drama, although many K-dramas are pretty good, but we have to clarify more. This will be a world in which we are living better than the average person is today. So we will be living better than well. We sometimes call this the H+ future, where it doesn't mean history positive, it means humanity plus, where we are living better than any humans have lived before. But as well as considering what may cause that H+ future, we have to think as well about this H- future. We have to look at the bad forces, the dangerous forces, the angry people, the upset people who might do terrible things to our planet and society. So maybe a few minutes on that before I break for more questions. There are lots of people who are sadly feeling left behind, who feel that their lives are now precarious. Karl Marx used to talk about the proletariat, but analysts have now talked about a new group of people, the precariat. They don't feel confident about their lives. Many people feel they are missing out on a fair share of the benefits that other members of society seem to experience. Many people feel their economic well-being is going down. Previously, every generation tended to live better than the earlier generation. Sons tended to earn more money than fathers, but this is no longer the case. And people worry that they are losing the possibility to enhance their earnings ability. And many people feel that the successful people in life are laughing at them. They feel that they are being overpowered, in some cases by immigrants, in some cases by globalists, by people who are comfortable with technology in a way that others aren't. And this is leading seriously to many people dying younger. So I showed you the curve before of increasing lifespan, but some parts of America, some parts of Britain have for several years been living less long than before because more people are killing themselves out of despair. People are killing themselves indirectly because of alcoholism or drug addiction or eating poor diets, and simply for lacking a sense of vision and purpose in their lives. So it's a very serious point, these deaths of despair. It's bad for society as a whole that there is a lot of angry, alienated people, and there needs to be police measures and guards to keep the angry people from damaging the property. But some people, a small minority, will get really angry, will get really upset. They'll seek revenge. They'll seek some fame. They'll seek some validation. And because they can access powerful technology, they can cause enormous trouble in society. Here's an example, another sad example. It's from a few years ago. I'm not sure if this was covered in the news in Korea, but there have been similar examples. This is showing the flight of an aeroplane, a German wings aeroplane from Barcelona. And what happened to it? If you look in the picture, it collided with a mountain at great speed, and everybody on board was killed. Why? Well, that was revealed in the voice recording from the cockpit. So after the airplane had reached its cruising altitude, the pilot left the cabin to go to the toilet, and the deputy pilot locked the door. And in these days, when the door was locked, you could not get back in. This was a technology invention to keep terrorists out. So the captain banged on the door, let me in, but the vice captain didn't pay any attention. He set the autopilot to go at speed to 100 feet. And yes, why? Because he was depressed. He was fed up. He had a disease. His eyesight was gradually failing. His company had told him he probably couldn't fly much more. He felt it's unfair. And he says, well, I'm going to go out with a big bang. Terrible, but it's happened in other places. What's the worst that could happen? Here, 150 people died. What might happen? You may have heard of Moore's Law. Moore's Law says every 18 months, roughly, hardware becomes twice as powerful. There's something called Moore's Law of mad science, named by a futurist called Eliezer Yudkowsky. It's not exact, but something like this is true. Every 18 months, the minimum IQ necessary for a mad person to destroy the world drops by perhaps 1 point. So today, if you want to destroy the world, you probably can't. But in the future, if your IQ is maybe 150, you might figure out how to do something. You might get your hands on homemade nuclear weapons. You might get your hands on a mechanism to create a terrible disease. After all, scientists are experimenting with new diseases. There is a hypothesis that COVID was the result of an experiment in a lab in Wuhan that went wrong. It went wrong because the virus may have leaked out accidentally. That was a bad outcome, but it's possible to engineer viruses much worse than COVID. So bioengineering, people could use 3D printing and drone delivery to fly in weapons and cause havoc and chaos. They can use cyber attacks to damage our society. They could use social media to generate all kinds of terrible, bad feelings. This is indeed an H- future. But we have to combat that. We have to combat by pointing out to people that even if they're ill today, there is the possibility for them to become much healthier, probably in the not too distant future. This is the H+ future. It involves managing wisely the possibilities of this fourth industrial revolution and leading to superabundance, sustainable superabundance for all. So it involves using these new technologies to hurry up with better, cleaner forms of energy, with green technology accelerated. It involves making sure there's plenty low-cost, healthy food for everybody, with transformation of farming mechanisms, with synthetic biotech. It involves finally doing what nanotech has promised for a long time, transforming how many goods are created and manufactured. It involves hurrying up with genetic editing and other improvements in biotech so that we can be healthier for much longer. It involves enhancing our all-round intelligence, not just making people intellectually smarter, but making more of us emotionally smarter, socially smarter, improving our spiritual intelligence as well. It involves using technology to do all the hard work in factories, leaving humans free to do what we love to do, to be creative, to explore, to get involved in creativity of different sorts. It involves using, in due course, technology to create better skyscrapers and space stations where eventually more people could live. And it involves using technology wisely for improved collaboration and improved politics. So that's the vision. And we could spend a long time exploring more of this. And I think that's very important to explore it. But I'll just look at time for creativity. I'll quote another futurist, Arthur C. Clarke. This is from just after he had consulted on the famous film 2001, in which some software reacted badly against humanity. You may remember that film. The software in there was called HAL, and it killed some humans and tried to control what the rest did. Arthur C. Clarke said that wasn't actually his vision for the future. His vision for the future was full unemployment, with software and robots doing all the work. So he said, we could all have time to play to our heart's content. And that might sound flippant. It might sound childish, but we can state it like this. If automation is doing all the work, then we humans can be free to do whatever is truly most fulfilling for us. And we can get there, not by trying to increase the economy further, increasing GDP with higher prices and more commercial activity. No, we have to change the philosophy of society to focus instead on reducing the costs for all the basics of good living. It means bringing down the costs of high quality housing, bringing down the costs of food, education, healthcare, security, and so on. That is the positive vision which lies ahead. It involves this H+, or sometimes called a transhumanist vision, in which we transcend many of the limits of human life, which have caused so much unhappiness, so much difficulty in history. Super longevity is possible. Super intelligence becomes possible. Super happiness becomes possible, and a super democracy too. And what that involves is that no longer will our bodies eventually decay, and become decrepit. Instead, we can use AI, nanotech, biotech to have much improved, longer lifespan. No longer will we be constrained by our short-sightedness, our mistakes that we often make when we're reasoning, which people call cognitive biases, or we can call it collective stupidity. Instead, we will use technology to make us see things more reliably. We will have all-round improved thinking capability. And instead of our psychology, which often leads us to be selfish, to be egotistical, often leads people to be depressed, to be alienated. After all, evolution did not particularly care whether we were happy. Evolution just cared that we passed our genes on to the next generation. So it gave us lots of destructive emotions, but we can solve that with improved technology. And we can finally adjust how we look after each other. Too much of history has seen the abuse of power. Too much of history has seen groups fighting each other, being divisive, deceiving each other. Well, with technology, we can have what I call a super democracy with more inclusion, lots of variety, lots of diversity, but lots of liberty. Now, some people are worried about this future. They say if people are living longer, what's going to happen to the planet? That's why we need to explore it and describe it more fully. Some people worry that if there are more people on the planet living longer, if more people are living in the kinds of ways that developed countries live, eating more food, traveling more, if people think that technology is going to increase both of that, it's going to be very bad for the environment. But if we see more broadly, we can have less intense carbon usage. We can have technology changing our energy use from dirty to clean. We can also have technology improving our ability to recycle, so that instead of generating lots of waste, we are more like nature, reusing what we do. So the same technologies that will allow us to be healthier and live longer, synthetic biology, will change how we grow meat. Instead of having lots of farmland dedicated to growing crops, which we then feed to animals, which we then kill and eat, a very wasteful process, a process that uses lots of water and land and emits lots of greenhouse gases, we can grow meat instead in laboratories. Soon, we can have better green energy, we can suck the greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere with negative emissions technology, we can have more repair, and as I mentioned, we can eventually, we don't need to do it soon, we can eventually go into space. The big picture here, and we can look again at some of the curves from Andrew McAfee that I mentioned before, the MIT economist. He points out that we are achieving more from less, that farms are actually getting smaller and we're growing more food from them. And in many other ways, we are using less material. So I think this future is desirable. I think it's credible, but it's not definite. And this other future, this H- future, is also, sadly, a credible future, because it is quite possible that we will mismanage these technologies and we'll do the opposite of what I showed in the previous chart. We will be too slow with green technology, and so the world will be damaged by polluting energy with greenhouse gases. We can be too slow with enhancements to agriculture, and we will leave more people in famine, eating bad quality food. We can be too slow with nanotech and lead to the world filling up with waste and biohazard. We can be too slow with these enhancements to our healthcare, and more people will die of chronic diseases like heart disease and dementia and cancer. We can be too slow with addressing emotional intelligence. And we may get clever people, but they'll be unwise in their cleverness. We can have people working in depressing ways. We can be too overcrowded, and we can end up with too much inequality and tribalism. As I said, this vision of the future, a terrible vision of the future, is sort of the mirror of the positive vision which I showed you. And both of them are possible. And the biggest difference is at the bottom here, is how are we structuring society? And I'll finish with just maybe one more slide, which is social tech. I'll go back to my NBIC picture. I can show you the things that nanotech can produce, that biotech can produce, infotech and cognitech can produce. Each of these can change the world remarkably in the next 15 years. I can show you some intersections, some combinations, so-called planetary tech. But the most important use of technology is in this field I have called social tech. And it's about our values. It's about what do we prioritize? What philosophy do we uphold? And depending on how we structure our society, it's going to have a big influence whether these other innovations are for positive or negative. And social tech is how do we organize our financial systems so that finance is given to the most worthwhile projects? How do we organize our computing systems? How do we organize our data systems? How do we organize our markets and so on? And most important is how do we structure our education? How do we structure our politics so that the investments, the resources are going in favor of that H+ world instead of an H- world? I have a few more slides prepared, but I've been going for nearly 90 minutes. So perhaps we should pause perhaps for general questions from the students. And depending on the questions, I might look at some of my last few slides about education and the skills that we need to prioritize more than ever before. But let me pause there, Professor Khu.
Okay, David, wonderful lecturing. Your lecture elaborate our thinking. We are narrow down, look at our field, tourism and service and that area. But now today we are learning from you about future and now and more other side of the techniques, see, which is wonderful and significant to us to think broadly. Might be our students might be have a great question for you. Please preparing your answer from now on. Okay, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Students, please feel free to ask him about the future. Do not ask a stock price. Just asking the future.
Well, you can ask me the stock price and I will tell you I can't predict it.
He's a futurist, so we ask the stock price tomorrow.
But that's not what futurists do. Futurists help people to think about possible futures, not to say for sure what will happen. I'm giving you possible futures, and we must now decide which we like, and we must decide what to do to support.
Okay, let me ask you this: how can be difference between futurist and fortune teller?
Well, that's a great question. So I will give you another question. What's the difference between astrology and astronomy? Both people look at the stars, and astrology creates fanciful stories about possible influence from the stars onto our human lives. And that's what we had for most of history. But astronomers collected more data and got more hypotheses. And they started checking each other's ideas and testing each other's ideas. So people like Galileo and Kepler and Isaac Newton. And another comparison, what's the difference between alchemy and chemistry? Alchemy had fanciful ideas that if you did various things, you could turn lead into gold. You could have, and it didn't work for most of history, but finally, from the recent few hundred years, Newton's alchemy was nonsense. So Newton was brilliant as a physicist, Newton spent his life divided in 3 areas. He did a third of his life was physics, a third of his life was alchemy, which produced nothing of use, and a third of his life he studied the Bible, and he wrote theories about the meaning of the book of Daniel and the book of Revelations, all nonsense as well. The difference was that he shared his ideas about physics with other people, so he was part of a community, and unless you're part of a community that criticizes and is able to do experiments, you can't make progress. Newton kept his ideas about alchemy largely secret. He kept his ideas about the Bible very secret because he disbelieved some of the doctrines of traditional Christianity. He didn't believe that Jesus Christ was God. He was a Unitarian rather than a Trinitarian. And if that had been known, he might even have been put to death. So he kept that very secret, but because he couldn't have the community. So back to your question, what's the difference between a fortune teller in the fairground and the real futurist? Well, we share our scenarios with each other and we criticize scenarios. And I've got a few more slides that look into what futurists actually do, but it's cumulative rather than just fanciful pictures. And we compare what our forecast.
They also use the data, the cumulative data from the long history.
Yeah,
like a book of change. They tell the anyway. It's a question. Okay,
but
students, it's your turn. No, hesitate.
If somebody wants to ask in Korean, then maybe Professor Ko, you could translate if that's easier for somebody.
Oh, they are speaking fluently speaker in English. Just a little bit hesitate for etiquette, Korean etiquette. Okay.
Actually, this is not a question, but a little bit of worry about the future. So I think in human history, we've been trying to develop so many things in different areas. And in few decades, the technology just beat it. And humans, people feel kind of powerless about everything. So it's kind of scared. So do we need more developed, more technology? So what is gonna be? So I'm still a little worried about the future. So what do you think about this?
You should be worried. We should all be worried. It's the right thing to be worried, but equally we should also be excited because that technology, if used right, can give us many things which will be wonderful. It can give us better food, better entertainment, better transport, and better health. Instead of our relatives and friends growing old and dying, having cancer, that will be past and gone. So we can use technology to have a much better future, but we should be scared because we are potentially going to do damaging things. So we have to have a serious discussion. What could go wrong and what could go right? Let's be aware of what might go wrong. Let's find out before it goes wrong and let's plan for it beforehand. And if we make proper plans, then technology can be very good. Let's consider the motor car. The motor car used to kill lots of people because there were no laws about how to drive. People could drive more or less how they liked. People didn't need to take a driving test. And cars weren't very safe. There were no safety belts. There were no crumple zones. So in the 1940s and 1950s, they were very dangerous. But we learned how to make better use of cars. So still, too many people die in car accidents, but it's much fewer than before. They are much safer because we have laws. We don't allow people to drink and drive. We test people regularly if they might be drinking and driving. We have speed limits. We have cameras to find out when people are driving too fast. And the cars are much safer. In the future, we'll replace the worst bug in the car, which is the human driver, because nearly every accident is caused by the human driver not paying enough attention. So we don't need to be scared of cars because we used systems, we used laws, and we used technology to improve it. But we did need to think about it. It didn't happen by accident. We needed a lot of people to consider it.
Well, like I imagine like in 10 years, the AI do the researches and like writing the articles and take my jobs. So how can I prepare for that?
Well, we can prepare for it by expecting that in the future, we won't need to work so long.
Oh,
And, well, maybe I will show 1 or 2 more slides because I have an answer to that. Professor Khu, can I switch on my slides again?
Sure.
I will continue from where I left off because the what next still needs to be explored. Let me move my windows around again.
Good,
So
good.
what are we going to do? How do we thrive as these technologies accelerate? And the first message to thrive is we should not fight change. We should not complain about change. That's pointless. Change is going to increase, and we have to be ready to succeed with change rather than waiting for change to stop. And we should expect the boundary between what humans can do and what AI can do, that boundary will move. So today, there are many things AI can't do very well, but within a few years, maybe it will do these other things too. We should even expect that boundary to accelerate. And yes, we need to be better at understanding exponential change, which means that the change, as I showed you in the beginning, is often slow and disappointing before it becomes disruptive. So the skill to survive involves looking at these trends, I've got this kind of formula here, EDCBA, looking for possible exponential change, looking at why a change has been disappointing, and figuring out could it change dramatically. And to distinguish the cases, we should have canary signals. Maybe you've heard of canaries. It used to be that human miners under the ground sometimes died because there was bad air, but the humans didn't realize the air had become bad. So they learned they could take small birds down the mine with them, called canaries. And the canary would be more sensitive. The canary would go unconscious quite quickly if the air was becoming bad. And the miners, the human miners, would notice this, and they would then say, oh, let's get out of here quickly. So we should work out canary signals for possible changes so that we're no longer surprised. We should look at the brakes, things that might slow down a change. And when we understand the brakes, we might realize they could be removed and they could be accelerating. So this skill is called trend analysis. And you asked me, Professor Khu, what is the difference between a forecaster in the fairground and a professional futurist? Well, we study trends and we try to create canary signals and analysis of brakes and accelerators. And that's the start of being a futurist. And by the way, I think everybody needs to be a futurist part-time. It's not something that we can miss out on. And the next level is to think about scenarios, which is not just one trend, it's several trends coming together, combinations of trends. And let me skip. I was going to skip a little bit. I pressed the wrong button there, sorry. Let me do that again. I'll come back into this. It's not this, sorry. I was going to skip over this and try to come in here. So how do we cope with these changes? We need to learn the skill of agility, which means instead of doing a very big, long project, we have to be able to do short little projects in which we learn about trends, we learn about scenarios a little bit, and then we discuss that with our colleagues. And that, again, is how we can gain some confidence in this very fast changing world. And we can't do this by ourselves. there are too many factors for any one person to consider, which is why we need to be better at collaborating, building partnerships, building mentors, building groups of people who can help us, building connections to good research, which is updated regularly. And to cope with all of this, we need to have stronger emotional resilience, which means, yes, we should be scared, but we shouldn't allow that to depress us and allow us to become incompetent. We shouldn't either blame ourselves when we fail, because things will be changing so often, we need to make experiments, and provided we are learning from our failures, then that can be the best response. We need also to learn how to learn, which means whatever we have learned in your fine course, Professor Khu, we may need to learn something else in a couple of years' time. So that's a vital skill. And the last vital skill, and this is to try and answer the question that Kwon and Min was asking, I think. Sorry if I got your name wrong there. So we need to be better at politics. And by politics, I mean small p politics, which means working with people we didn't particularly like, but even more, it's big P politics. We have to change how politics works, because as fewer of us work and earn money from a living, we need to ensure that there is something like a universal basic income, or if not exactly that, something similar, which redistributes the benefits from the very wealthy, successful companies who are in charge of AI. Their profits must be distributed in some good way for everybody. So smarter social incentives, smarter regulation. So sadly, my advice, I say sadly, you may not like it, each of us must become more aware of political things. Each of us must be prepared to influence politics so that they understand these likely changes in technology, the likely changes in employment. And instead of just encouraging everybody to work harder to get a new job, which robots and software can't do, we have to focus instead on getting the universal basic income in place. And I've written about that in some of my books. I've written about the sustainable superabundance, which is quite a short book that covers that in more detail. I've written about the abolition of aging as a possibility, that people will no longer grow older and weaker. I've written about foresight in general, what distinguishes modern foresight from just wishful thinking of the past. I've written about the lessons from the smartphone industry, and more recently, I've written a lot about this singularity, which I briefly touched on, the fifth industrial revolution, and how we can manage the lead up to that in a way that controls technology rather than technology doing terrible things to all of us. And that really is the end of my slides. So I will stop sharing this in a minute.
Wow. David, I'm going to buy some books from Amazon.
Thank you so much. Some of this is online, by the way. My most recent book, it's all online for free, but you can certainly use some of your educational budget to look at some of these.
Yeah. This great lecture, I pay very small, honorarium. So I'm going to buy your books, pay back more. Plus honorarium.
my motive is not to make money, as you can tell. My motive is to change the world so that we have a sustainable superabundance instead of the H- future.
That's why I'm giving the small money to you. I'm using you.
Well, it's collaboration. We have to learn how to collaborate. We need to know who are the good sources, who can give us some information which can
this is a great opportunity to connect with the London society through these seminars. We have some connection in only academia, but your standing is out of academia, and you are real, Londoner, and your community is belong to original native London, community in England. So probably we are connecting to you and the London society. Hopefully,
Yes.
one of our students will, who knows? Okay, questions? Sure.
Can I go first?
Sure.
Okay. So actually your lecture reminded me of the book that I recently read. It's called the Future Society Report, written by the professor in the Seoul University. And then from the book, he predicted that by 2090, the society will be divided by 4 caste groups. And the 4th one, the lowest level, is like a normal labor groups like us. And 3rd is the AI. And the 2nd is YouTuber or influencers. And the top one is a Google or Tencent, the company with a high tech or data. So that really made me try out for the YouTubers. Just joking. So as a futurist, do you actually agree with this? And I have another question regarding that. So to be prepared more for the future as a student who study tourism, how do you prospect or foresee the future of the tourism industry?
Wow.
Right. So I like that forecast by the Korea Seoul University professor, except that I think the changes will probably happen sooner than 2090, because I think AI is developing very quickly. And when AI is more advanced, it will allow the other technologies to accelerate too. His forecast of a division in society is similar to one by another historian. He's very famous. He's called Yuval Noah Harari. I'll put that in the chat.
Yuval Harari.
He may be well known. Yuval.
Sapiens.
All right. And he has a book, several books about the future, which I think are generally pretty good. But he says there could be a division into 2 types, which he calls the nearly gods and the mostly useless. So that's only 2 groups as opposed to 4 groups. So the nearly gods are the people who are in control of the AI, like Google or Tencent or Naver, perhaps in the future, who can do very well. And nearly gods means they can do things which previously gods in mythologies or religions did, creating life, almost have omniscience. But why is everybody else nearly useless? It's because they have no economic value to give. No, we can't enroll in factories because the factories are all operated by machines. We can't enroll even as writers because there are machines doing better writing. So what should we do? Well, it shouldn't be terrible, provided there is a distribution to all of us of sufficient wealth. It doesn't need to be much, so that we have a good life. And then what do we do with our lives? Well, we can be like retired people and enjoy life. We can enjoy sport, we can enjoy music, we can enjoy Netflix and K-drama, we can enjoy virtual reality, we can enjoy mathematics. When I want to spend 100 years studying some of the mathematics, which I loved as a teenager, but I never had enough time to learn more of it, and spending time with people, because people are fascinating, and spending time in virtual worlds. So there will be lots to do. So maybe even if we are economically useless, it doesn't mean we are bad. It means we have the chance to be humanity plus. So that's my sort of summary of my response to what sounds like a very interesting book. And then you asked me about the future of tourism. Well, I'm not an expert on tourism, but I will offer some very naive opinions, and then you can probably come up with much better solutions than me. So we will travel more in virtual worlds, it's likely, Virtual reality has been disappointing still for a long time. When people put on the virtual goggles, they often feel sick. They feel a bit uneasy because when you move your head, the picture doesn't quite adjust exactly fast enough. And so a biological reaction takes place. However, with the higher processing, then when we move our heads, the picture will keep up. And so that VR sickness probably will be solved. And yeah, we will have wonderful experiences in VR, which will have more and more of the experiences of real world tourism. And then people will still go on real world tourism, but we will have a different kind of headset, not the virtual reality, but we will have the augmented reality, which has also been disappointing. I go back to my picture, you know, we had lots of hype, excitement about Google Glass. 12 years ago, I thought Google Glass was going to take over the world. It wasn't very good. Why? Because it was quite poor. You could only see a very small field of view, people call it. And the battery life wasn't good. And it was socially awkward. When you saw somebody wearing Google Glass, you thought they are a glass hole, which is a kind of a rude word, which means they are wearing glass and they are filming you and you don't want to be filmed. So we have to solve some technical issues and we have to solve some social issues. But eventually, when people go touring, when they look through the different towns of Korea, they will see the towns today, but they will also see how it was before in the Shilla dynasty, in the Three Kingdoms period, and so forth. So that will augment their experience. So that will surely happen as well. And each person will have in their field of view the information that's most relevant to them. The problem with guidebooks today, of course, and with guides is they give the information for everybody. So if you're giving a guide to 10 people, you have to give the information that will be useful for all 10 people. But when we have personalized electronic guides, the guide will know exactly what I'm interested in. They won't tell me the stories I already know, but they'll tell me the new stories. They'll tell me the stories about Korean mathematics because they will know I'm interested in mathematics. They will tell me the stories about Korean inventions because they know I'm interested in the history of science. To what extent Koreans had printing presses before Gutenberg and stuff like that. So, and they will show me that. So it will be personalized and augmented. Humans will still be there to an extent, but sadly, humans, well, I say sadly, inevitably, humans will do less, but maybe not for 10 or 15 years. So you should have a good career for at least 10 or 15 years. And by then, the AIs themselves may suggest new jobs that you may do if you are able to learn and adapt.
Yeah. Okay, we are running out of time and 60 minutes left. One last question.
Okay, can I ask the question?
Sure.
Okay, first, thank you for your lecture, Professor. Can you hear me well?
Yes, you're
Okay.
Kim
Hear me? Yeah, I'm sorry for
That's
writing
okay.
my name. Yeah, reading my name in Korean.
That's all right.
Sorry. So I want to ask about the technology in our context, like hospitality and service industry. So many researchers nowadays study about the difference between the technology and human service, because in the human interaction is really important part in our industry, because customer want to get a high quality of service from the people in the hotel or some restaurant. So also in Korea, we have a lot of social problem causing by using kiosk technology. So I want to ask about your opinion about the phenomenon that employment is replaced by robot or technology in service industry. So what is your perspective or expectation?
Great question. I think kiosks will get better. Kiosks will give more of a human-like experience. I remember when banks started putting systems outside on the wall where you could go to get money without seeing a human. And many people said, who's going to use that? People like to go and talk to humans when they get money from the bank. But it soon turned out that we were quite happy to get the money without talking to humans. Then in the early days of the internet, there were some skeptics. They said there will never be e-commerce because who is going to buy something without talking to a human being about it? And especially if it's a big price item, they're bound to need human reassurance. But we got comfortable with looking at other human reviews. We didn't need to actually speak to the human. We could read their reviews, and that made us more comfortable with buying things without human involvement. So over time, people will adapt, and over time, AI will not just be AI, artificial intelligence, it will be artificially emotionally intelligent. There's a lovely book called Gerald Decoded, putting that in the chat, Gerald Decoded, written by Rana El-Koubi. I'm not sure I spelled her name right. She was an Egyptian who studied eventually in Cambridge, England, and then went to Cambridge, the USA, and she has pioneered artificial emotional intelligence, which is software that picks up our emotional state. So it knows when we're getting bored, it knows when we're smiling but not actually happy, we're just pretending to smile, but actually we are ill at ease. And it also manifests, it shows emotions back to us. And I think these systems will eventually do service better than many humans, especially in difficult or trying situations like healthcare. Imagine the nurses who have to look after patients who are ill or patients who are losing their memory. It can be quite difficult, even for the most wonderful human nurse, to keep on being positive and outgoing, whereas the robots with artificial emotional intelligence will never get tired. They will find ways to constantly engage. And in some situations, these robots have already stimulated people who haven't talked for a long time to suddenly start talking again. And here it's not robots of like humans, it's robots like pet dogs or pet seals. And so I think eventually there will be the transformation of the service industry by artificially emotional intelligence.
Yep. We still 2 minutes left. Real one last question. 1 minute question, 1 minute answer. Okay.
I have a quick question about the dystopian view, which is H- view, what you mentioned, in the micro perspective, especially in tourism, because I'm studying it, and in the sense of the left behind, because I think that will cause the maybe the generation conflict, because as earlier mentioned, some people, they are having a hard time in using the kiosk or the other new technology in tourism, and some people who cannot access to that kind of technology, they will not have the same opportunity, and they will lose some of the opportunity that can be maybe benefit.
Okay, stop there. Stop there. Okay, answer.
Great question.
I would like to know what is your suggestion? We cannot train everyone to use the technology.
So we need better usability. And that happened in mobile phones. At first, people said grandmothers and grandfathers will never use smartphones. They're too complicated. But actually, nowadays, most grandmothers and grandfathers can use mobile phones quite well, especially within Kakao and sending pictures. They can't use all the features, but the software got easy enough to use. So in kiosks, the kiosk must figure out who's using it. Is it a smart youngster who wants a complicated interface, or is it somebody who is nervous? And then it must help them. And it's when you can talk to them as well. And when the kiosk can pick up your emotional state, then even the people who are left behind will feel more comfortable. And there's scope here for people making a good business by providing that usability.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. David Wood. Okay, he is such a great futurist, technist and scientist, and he is one of the most famous in London community. So I invited him very cheap price. because of our strong relationship with him. Okay, once again, thank you very much. What time was there now? It's there.
It's 3 o'clock.
3 o'clock
Yes.
in the morning.
Yes, what is it? Hana Dul Set. Sesigan?
Sesigan.
Sesi.
Great. David Wood, please say goodbye to our students in Korean, not English.
안녕히 가세요.
감사합니다.
Thank you so much.
감사합니다.
Look forward to see you soon in London.
Well,
Thank
someday
you.
I'll come to Korea and maybe I can
Sure.
visit you in your
Call me,
lovely Daehakyo.
call me to KakaoTalk through the KakaoTalk.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.